I am Mr. Midnight Horror, your terrifying host. Today, you're about to hear the most brutal and unforgettable tale of a hunter who sacrificed everything to fight creatures that were already winning the war. You'll hear about intelligent creatures older than civilization, about cursed humans seeking vengeance, and about one man's descent from paramedic to a warrior battling forces that should never exist. If you're already part of our community, your support means the world to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this. Or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. My name is Daniel Mitchell. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a paramedic in Memphis, Tennessee. I've seen death plenty of times. Car accidents, overdoses, heart attacks, the kind of deaths that come quick or slow, but at least they follow rules. Medicine has answers for most of it. That was before my mother died. That was before I learned that death doesn't always follow the rules I thought I understood. My mother, Elizabeth Mitchell, lived alone in a small house on the north side of Memphis, near the Shelby Farms area. She was 64 years old, still working part-time at a library, still living the quiet life she'd built after my father passed 15 years earlier. I called her every Sunday. We had dinner together the first Saturday of every month. A routine. A predictable life. On March 14th, a Thursday evening, the call came into the station. An animal attack at a residence. The address made my hands go cold before dispatch even finished the sentence. I recognized it immediately. The house number, the street name. I left the station without waiting for approval, running red lights the entire way across the city, my heart already knowing what my mind refused to accept. When I arrived, the paramedics were already there. The house was surrounded by police cars, their lights casting red and blue shadows across the front lawn. I saw the blood before I saw the body. Dark stains on the porch, on the doorframe, trails leading into the living room. My legs moved through the scene like they belonged to someone else. Elizabeth Mitchell was found in her living room, positioned on the sofa where she must have tried to seek shelter. The injuries were catastrophic. No animal attack I'd ever seen in Memphis produced wounds like these. Her left arm had been torn at the shoulder, nearly severed. Deep lacerations covered her torso, her throat, her face. The wounds were too large, too deliberate, too focused on causing maximum damage. The pattern didn't match anything natural. Detective James Morton was standing near the window when I entered the room. He knew me from previous calls where I'd provided medical assistance at crime scenes. When he saw me, his expression shifted immediately. He knew. Somehow, he knew this was personal. "Daniel," he said quietly, stepping toward me. "I'm so sorry. Let me explain what we found." But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at her, at what remained of my mother. The paramedics had covered her with a sheet. Only part of her face was visible, and even that was enough to break something inside me that I didn't know could break. What happened here? My voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. "What kind of animal does this?" Detective Morton exchanged a glance with the uniformed officer beside him. "That's what we're trying to determine." The neighbors reported hearing screaming around 9 p.m. When they looked outside, they saw something moving away from the house into the woods behind the property. They described it as large, moving on 4 legs, but the details were vague. It was dark. Everything happened fast. "What did they see?" I pressed. "What exactly did they see?" They said it was too dark to be certain. One neighbor swore it had red eyes. Another said it looked like a dog, but wrong somehow. Bigger, shaped wrong. We've been in contact with animal control, but nothing in the wildlife registry matches what they described. No bears in Memphis. No large predators that would do this kind of damage. I looked at Patricia's hand, the one visible beneath the white sheet. Even in death, even torn and lifeless, I recognized it. That hand had held mine when I was born, had guided me through life, had taught me how to survive in a world that was harder and crueler than I wanted it to be. I want to see the wounds, I said flatly. All of them. I want to know exactly what killed her. The coroner, a woman named Dr. Margaret Stevens, was waiting for me. She pulled back the sheet and showed me everything. The attack had been vicious, methodical, and brutal. The creature had targeted vital areas with precision. This wasn't the frantic attack of a panicked animal. This was something that knew what it was doing. The wounds suggest claws, Dr. Margaret explained. Large claws. The bite marks are also unusual, too large for any canine on record in North America. Some of the damage looks more consistent with something that has both claws and primal strength. The depth of these lacerations suggests whatever did this had significant muscle mass and knew how to use it. I stood there, processing her words. In my training as a paramedic, I'd learned to remain clinical, professional, detached. That training broke down completely as I looked at my mother's body. "Where are the neighbors?" I asked. "In their homes. We've collected statements. If you want to speak with them, I can arrange it." I found them an hour later. The Hendersons lived next door to my mother's house. George Henderson was a retired factory worker, somewhere in his 70s. His wife, Martha, was in her late 60s. They were sitting in their living room, the television on but clearly unwatched, when I knocked on their door. "I'm Daniel Mitchell," I said. "Elizabeth was my mother." George's face went pale. Martha put her hand over her mouth. "We're so sorry," Martha said immediately. "We tried to stop it. We heard her screaming and we came out with a flashlight, but it was too fast. By the time we got there, it was already retreating into the woods." "Describe it," I said. "Every detail, no matter how small." George took a breath. "It was large, bigger than any dog I've ever seen. Its fur was dark, almost black, but it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The way it moved was wrong, Daniel. It moved like it had broken its own spine and was compensating for it somehow. 4 legs, but the front 2 looked almost like arms. The eyes," Martha added. "They were the worst part, red and glowing, like something was burning inside them. It looked at us, Daniel. It looked at us like it was deciding whether to come after us next." "How long did you see it before it disappeared?" "Maybe 10 seconds, George said. "Long enough to see it clearly. Long enough to know it wasn't anything natural. Then it was just gone. Moved into the woods like the darkness was calling it home." I left their house feeling something I'd never felt before. A cold, focused rage mixed with a hunger for understanding. Whatever had killed Elizabeth wasn't a bear or a wild dog. The Hendersons weren't lying. Their fear was too genuine, their description too consistent and detailed. Over the following days, I researched everything I could find about animal attacks in the Memphis area. There had been nothing reported in the past 2 years, no missing people, no injuries that matched this pattern. But as I dug deeper, I found older files in the police archives. Cases from 5, 10, 15 years ago. Unsolved murders. People found with injuries that didn't match any known animal. Investigations that had gone cold because there was no rational explanation for what had happened. One file caught my attention. A man named Raymond Torres had been killed in a similar manner back in 1998 in a wooded area near the Shelby Forest State Park. The official report claimed it was likely a bear attack, despite bears not being native to the area. The case had been closed without resolution. Then I found something else. In an old city newspaper archive from 1998, there was a brief mention of strange sightings in the Shelby area. People reported seeing a large, unidentifiable creature moving through the woods at night. The stories were vague, dismissed as folklore and exaggeration. But they existed. I went to the Shelby Forest State Park one evening, following a gut feeling I couldn't articulate. The woods were thick and dark, even in early spring. I walked for hours, finding nothing except the remnants of old campfires and abandoned paths. But then, as the sun was setting and the forest grew darker, I found something. A cave entrance, hidden behind a dense thicket of brush and fallen trees. The entrance was small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, but inside, the cave opened up into a larger chamber. On the dirt floor, I found massive paw prints. The size was impossible. The largest dog paw print is typically 3.5 inches. These were easily 8 inches across, with marks suggesting claws that extended several inches beyond the paw pad. I also found human clothing, a torn shirt, weathered and old, partially buried in the dirt, and beside it something else. An old leather journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. I opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was shaky, desperate, written by someone in the grip of overwhelming fear or pain. The entries were dated, going back more than 15 years. I read the first complete entry, dated March 12, 1998. It came again last night. I felt it inside me again when the moon was full. I can't control it anymore. The hunger is too strong. 3 people dead now, and it keeps getting worse. I'm not a man anymore. Whatever I was is gone. I need help. I need someone to understand what's happening to me. I need someone to kill me before it kills again. The pages that followed were increasingly incoherent, filled with descriptions of pain, transformation, and something called the hunger. The final entry was dated March 14, 1998, exactly 15 years before my mother's death. It happened again. I didn't want it to. I tried to fight it, but the moon was so bright and the hunger was so loud. When I woke up, there was blood everywhere. I don't remember her face, but I remember the screaming. I remember how easy it was. Tomorrow I'll go to the police. Tomorrow I'll confess. But tonight, I need to hide what I am. I need to make sure nobody else dies. The next page was blank, and the pages after that as well. I sat in that cave, holding that journal, and something shifted inside me. My mother's death wasn't random. It wasn't an accident or a mistake. She had been killed by something that science couldn't explain. Something that had been killing people in Memphis for decades. Something that wore human skin and lived in darkness. And somehow, I knew with absolute certainty that it was coming back. The person or thing that had written this journal 15 years ago might be dead now. But whatever had created it, whatever had infected it with this curse, was still out there. The police investigation into Patricia's death went nowhere. Animal control found no evidence of exotic animals in the area. The wounds were recorded and filed, then forgotten, as more pressing cases demanded attention. My mother was cremated, and I scattered her ashes in Shelby Forest, not knowing why I felt compelled to do it there, understanding only that some part of me knew she belonged in that place, connected to whatever darkness lived in those woods. For weeks after her death, I couldn't sleep. I spent my nights in the forest, searching for signs, learning to track movement through brush and undergrowth. I started researching mythology, folklore, and cryptozoology, subjects I dismissed as fiction months earlier. And in those late-night searches, I found something that would change everything. I found a story about creatures called werewolves. Not the Hollywood version with special effects and roaring transformations, but something older, something that had been hidden in folklore and dismissed as superstition. The transformation was tied to the lunar cycle. The hunger was uncontrollable. The creature retained some human intelligence while in its bestial form. People could be infected, carriers of whatever caused the transformation, passed down through bloodlines or transferred through contact with an infected creature's blood. One night, 6 weeks after Patricia's death, I was back at that cave in Shelby Forest. I'd been searching it repeatedly, looking for anything else that might explain what had happened. The journal was gone. I'd kept it, hidden in my apartment. But I knew there had to be more information somewhere. That was when I heard the footsteps. Human footsteps, deliberate and slow, approaching the cave entrance from outside. I was armed with nothing except a flashlight and the knife I'd taken to carrying in my jacket. I positioned myself behind a large rock formation, controlling my breathing, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. The figure that appeared in the cave entrance was a man, probably in his 50s or 60s, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been weathered by more than just time. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a faded jacket, and he was carrying a weapon. An old revolver, the kind my grandfather used to own. He walked slowly through the cave, searching for something. His eyes scanned the dirt floor where I'd found the paw prints and the journal. When he saw me step out from behind the rock, he didn't look surprised. Instead, he looked relieved. "You found this place," he said. It wasn't a question. "Who are you?" I asked. The man lowered his gun slightly. "My name is Father Michael Kessler. I've been tracking the same creature that killed your mother for a very long time, and I think it's time you understood what you're really dealing with." My heart was pounding in my chest, but there was something about this stranger's certainty that made me listen instead of running. "Come with me," Father Kessler said. "Away from this cave, away from this place. It will return here eventually, and if it finds us here together, we might not survive the meeting. But if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to understand what happened to Patricia, then I can teach you how to fight back. I can teach you how to hunt." For the first time since my mother's death, I felt something other than despair and rage. I felt a glimmer of purpose. I went with him that night. Father Kessler's apartment was small and sparse, almost monastic in its simplicity. No television, no decorations, just books and photographs, and a single framed image of Jesus on the wall. He made coffee in the kitchen while I sat at his table, my mind still struggling to process what had happened. 6 weeks earlier, I was living a normal life. Now I was in the apartment of a priest who claimed to know about creatures that shouldn't exist. "I'm not actually a priest," Kessler said when he returned with 2 mugs. "Not anymore. That's what people assume when they see the collar. But I left the church 23 years ago. I still wear it out of habit, I suppose. And because it opens doors that wouldn't otherwise open." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you leave?" "Because I discovered the church would rather deny the existence of evil than face it directly." He sat across from me. I was doing missionary work in rural Pennsylvania when I encountered my first werewolf. It was killing livestock, then people. The local authorities had no answer. I did some research, consulted with people outside the official church hierarchy, and I learned what it was. I told my superiors. They told me I was experiencing a crisis of faith, suggested therapy, threatened me with excommunication. So I left. "How many have you killed?" I asked. 47, he said without hesitation. "Over the past 23 years. Some were infected carriers who didn't even know what they were. Others were fully aware, predators who enjoyed the hunt. Each one was different." "And you know how to kill them?" "I know one way to kill them," he corrected. "Silver through the heart. Direct contact with the central organ is critical. Bullets work if you're precise. Blades work better because you have more control over the trajectory. But there are complications. Some are stronger than others. Some are smarter. Some have capabilities beyond what normal folklore suggests. And some..." He paused. "Some are old enough and intelligent enough that they've learned to defend themselves against hunters." He stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down several volumes. They looked ancient, some with leather bindings that were cracked and deteriorated. He placed them on the table in front of me. "These are records," he said. "Histories of werewolf sightings dating back centuries. The pattern is consistent. The creature appears in a region, kills for weeks or months, then either dies or moves on. When it moves on, it takes its infection with it. The spread is slow, but it's inevitable. For everyone we eliminate, there could be 3 more we never find." Over the next 3 weeks, Kessler taught me what he knew: how to identify a werewolf's presence, how to recognize a carrier before they transform, how to make silver bullets from melted down coins and jewelry, how to read the journals and notes left by other hunters throughout history, how to understand the rhythm of the lunar cycle, and predict when the creature would be most active and most vulnerable. He also taught me how to fight. Kessler had trained in martial arts and combat techniques during his years as a hunter. He was older than me by 25 years, but his body was lean and strong. He set up a training area in his basement and taught me how to move, how to strike, how to survive hand-to-hand combat with something that was faster and stronger than I was. "You'll never outmatch them in direct strength," he said during one of our first sessions, as I struggled to break free from a basic hold. "So you don't try to. You use intelligence. You use terrain. You use the fact that they're often arrogant and underestimate human resilience." The training was brutal. Kessler had no mercy during the sessions. He threw me against walls, locked my joints until I was screaming, forced me to fight when my arms were burning with exhaustion. On the 4th week of training, he finally deemed me ready for a real hunt. "There's been activity reported in West Virginia," he said, handing me a leather satchel. "Near the Appalachian Trail, in a place called Blackwood Hollow. Hikers have gone missing. Remains were found by rangers, but they've been blamed on bears. It's not bears." We drove north for 12 hours, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. The landscape changed gradually from the flat Mississippi Delta to rolling hills, and then to steep mountain terrain. The Appalachian peaks rose around us, ancient and weathered and somehow darker than normal mountains, as if they'd seen too much violence over the millennia. Blackwood Hollow was a small town, population barely above 800, built into a valley between 2 steep ridges. The town had that worn-down look of places that had seen better decades. Most of the storefronts on Main Street were boarded up. The people we saw walking the streets looked worn themselves, tired in a way that suggested they'd been dealing with something heavier than normal small-town life. We checked into the only hotel still operating, a place called the Ridgeline Inn. The owner, a woman named Elizabeth, who must have found our appearance suspicious, barely looked at us as she handed over the keys. The room was basic. 2 beds, a bathroom, a window overlooking the empty street. "Tomorrow morning, we investigate," Kessler said. "Tonight, we rest and prepare." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of the mountains, wind through the valleys, animals moving through the darkness. The occasional car on the distant highway. Kessler slept in the other bed, and his rest seemed peaceful and undisturbed, the rest of a man who'd made peace with what he did. Morning brought rain, heavy and cold, with fog that rolled down from the peaks and covered the small town like a shroud. We drove out to the last known location where hikers had gone missing, following directions from a park ranger named Douglas, who'd seemed both helpful and grateful that someone knowledgeable was taking an interest in the disappearances. The trailhead was empty, except for an old pickup truck that looked like it had been abandoned years ago. We suited up. Kessler showed me how to properly handle the weapons we'd brought, how to distribute the weight so it wouldn't throw off my movement, how to access the silver bullets quickly without fumbling. "Once we encounter it, everything you learned means nothing," Kessler said. "Training doesn't compare to real combat with one of these creatures. You'll be terrified. That's normal. You'll want to run. That's also normal. The key is to push past the terror and stay focused on the objective." "Which is?" Survival. If you survive, you win. Everything else is secondary. We entered the forest. The trees here were dense and old, blocking most of the daylight despite the early morning hour. The rain fell harder as we moved deeper into the wilderness, and the ground became slick with mud and fallen leaves. Kessler moved with confidence, reading something in the environment that I couldn't see, moving upslope along a ridge that seemed to run parallel to the trail. After 2 hours of hiking, he stopped. He held up his hand and I mimicked the gesture immediately. We were standing in a clearing, surrounded by ancient hemlock and oak trees, and in the center of the clearing was what remained of a camp. The tent was torn to pieces. Sleeping bags were scattered around, stained dark with blood. And beside the tent were the remains. What I saw in that clearing would stay with me forever. 2 bodies, or what remained of 2 bodies, partially decomposed by 3 weeks of exposure to the elements and animals. One body, I could tell by the remnants of clothing it was a woman, was missing both arms and most of the lower body. The other, a man, had been opened from sternum to pelvis, his internal organs scattered and partially consumed. I turned away and vomited, my stomach convulsing until there was nothing left inside me but bile and horror. Kessler stood motionless, studying the scene with clinical detachment. "This is what you're fighting," he said quietly. "Not for revenge or justice. You fight because if you don't, more people will end up like this. Remember that when the fear gets too loud." We marked the location and continued deeper into the forest. Kessler was tracking something now. I could see it in how his eyes moved, in how his body angled through the terrain. He was following a scent I couldn't perceive, following something only experience and years of hunting had taught him to recognize. By afternoon, we found the den. It was a cave system built into the side of the ridge, the entrance hidden behind a dense growth of rhododendron. Fresh kill lay scattered around the entrance, a deer, partially eaten, still reeking of death and decay. And beside the kills, something else, clothing, scraps of fabric and leather and denim. "It's been wearing human clothes," Kessler said, "carrying them somewhere, probably changing into them after the transformation recedes. That means it's intelligent. It understands the concept of hiding what it is." We set up our position as the sun began to set. Kessler chose a rocky outcropping that gave us a clear view of the cave entrance with natural cover from the approaching darkness. He showed me how to position the rifle, how to control my breathing, how to wait. "It could come in the next hour," he said, "or it could take until midnight. Patience is critical. If you move too early or too late, it will see you. And then this becomes a fight instead of an execution." We waited. The temperature dropped as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and earth and something else, something rotten and wrong that didn't belong in nature. I could smell it on the wind, and my body recognized it as a threat before my conscious mind could process what I was sensing. "It's close," Kessler whispered. "Stay absolutely still." The creature emerged from the cave just as full darkness fell. It came out on 4 legs, its body massive and misshapen, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb what little light the moon provided. Its head was wrong, between wolf and human, with a snout that was too long and ears that were positioned incorrectly. The eyes glowed red when the light caught them, burning like embers in a fire that had long since cooled. It moved away from the cave, moving downslope toward the campsite where the bodies still lay. It began to feed, tearing at the remains with mechanical precision, consuming what was left of the hikers without hesitation or mercy. Kessler waited. He waited for minutes that felt like hours, his body rigid, his breathing controlled. When he finally moved, it was slow and deliberate. He raised the rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot echoed through the mountains like thunder. The creature fell forward, collapsed onto the remains of its meal. For a moment, there was silence. Then the creature's back legs kicked, pushing it forward, moving it away from the area where it had been hit. "Go!" Kessler said, moving down the slope. We advanced on the wounded animal. It was trying to move deeper into the forest, blood pouring from a wound in its shoulder where the silver bullet had passed through. It was breathing hard, that sound like steam escaping from a kettle. Kessler fired again. The second shot took it in the rear leg, and the creature fell, its back end collapsing. It turned its head toward us and made a sound, something between a growl and a scream, that cut off abruptly as its vocal cords seemed to lock up. "The silver's in its system," Kessler said. "It's feeling the burn now. Stay back." The creature was convulsing, thrashing against the pain of the poisonous metal spreading through its bloodstream. Kessler moved closer, the knife already in his hand. The creature saw him coming and tried to attack, lunging forward despite the destroyed rear leg, its massive jaws open wide. Kessler sidestepped with the economy of movement born from decades of experience. He grabbed the creature's fur, pulled himself close, and drove the silver blade directly into the side of the animal's head, angling for the brain beneath the thick skull. The creature convulsed once, violently, and then went still. For a long moment, neither Kessler nor I moved. We were both breathing hard, our bodies flooded with adrenaline and fear. The creature's body began to change. The fur receded into the skin, the snout shortened. The skeletal structure shifted beneath the skin. Within 10 minutes, what lay before us was the corpse of a man. Late 30s, his body scarred and twisted, his face frozen in an expression of rage and pain. "Help me," Kessler said. We wrapped the body in a tarp we'd brought and carried it deeper into the forest, away from the trail, and the places where people might find it. Kessler had prepared for this. He'd scouted the area before the hunt, identified a deep ravine where bodies could be disposed of and wouldn't be easily discovered. We left the creature there and returned to the cave to erase the evidence of the kill. It took hours. We cleaned the blood from the rocks, destroyed the scraps of clothing the creature had been hoarding, filled the cave entrance with debris and dead wood, so it would look abandoned and hostile to human exploration. By the time we finished, the sun was beginning to rise over the mountains, and we were both exhausted past the point of coherent thought. But I'd done it. I'd killed something that human science couldn't explain, something that had been hunting people and destroying lives. And as we drove away from Blackwood Hollow, leaving the small town behind, I understood that this was my life now. This was what I would spend the rest of my days doing. Kessler drove in silence for the first 2 hours. Then he said something that would resonate with me for years to come. "The problem is that for everyone we kill, there are more. And they're learning. They're adapting. Some of them are starting to understand that we're hunting them, and they're changing tactics." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I've been at this for over 2 decades, and the creature numbers aren't decreasing. If anything, they're increasing. We're in a war we might not be able to win." But there was no turning back for me. My mother was dead. Elizabeth was dead. This was the only path forward that made any sense. When we returned to Memphis, I made a decision. I told Kessler I wanted to work independently. He'd taught me enough. I understood the basics. I could read the signs, could track the creatures, could execute them when the opportunity presented itself. He didn't argue with me, didn't try to convince me to stay. He simply handed me a list of names, other hunters scattered across the country, and told me I could call them if I ever needed assistance or information. "You'll learn faster on your own than you ever would working with me," he said. "Mistakes teach lessons that instruction never can. Just make sure you survive your mistakes long enough to learn from them. I quit my job as a paramedic the next week. I sold my apartment and my possessions and bought a truck. I spent the next 3 weeks building my supplies: silver bullets, silver weapons, protective equipment, camping gear, surveillance equipment. I filled a leather journal with every detail I could remember about the creatures I'd read about in Kessler's collection of lore and histories. And then I hit the road, following the whispers and rumors of activity, hunting wherever the creatures led me. The first year was brutal. I made countless mistakes. I went after a lead that turned out to be nothing. I tracked a creature for 2 weeks only to lose it to the day cycle and have to start over. I was shot by a property owner while I was investigating a barn, barely escaping with a wound in my shoulder that nearly killed me. But I also made my first independent kill. Then my second. Then my third. By the time I was 34 years old, I'd killed 23 creatures across the United States. I was hardened, scarred, and more alone than I'd ever been. My only human contact was brief and transactional. Conversations with people who knew something about strange deaths, or with other hunters I encountered on rare occasions. And then came the case that changed everything. A brutal series of murders in rural Texas, where a creature wasn't just hunting for food, but hunting with apparent intelligence, targeting specific types of people, leaving messages in blood and death. I drove toward Texas as a new full moon rose over the landscape, not knowing that what I was about to encounter would be the most dangerous creature I'd ever faced, and that it would force me to question everything I'd learned about the creatures I hunted. The Texas heat hit me like a physical force as I crossed the state line. It was May, early summer, and the landscape had transformed from green mountains to flat, dry plains broken by occasional hills and limestone outcroppings. The hill country region outside Austin was different, though. Rolling terrain with cedar scrub and live oak, cattle ranches spreading across thousands of acres, the terrain rugged enough to provide hiding places for things that didn't belong in daylight. The rancher's name was Thomas Hartley. He'd contacted me through a forum dedicated to unexplained livestock deaths, leaving a message that reached me through a complicated chain of encrypted emails. 7 cattle ranch workers had died in the past 4 weeks. The official story was that a mountain lion had escaped from a sanctuary 2 states over and was migrating through the region. But Hartley knew that wasn't true. He'd seen something himself, glimpsed it in the darkness when it came for his horses. Hartley's ranch sprawled across 12,000 acres about 30 miles north of Austin. The main house was a large limestone structure built in the style of ranch houses from the 1950s, surrounded by corrals and barns and equipment sheds. When I arrived, Hartley was waiting on the porch, a man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and calloused hands that suggested he'd worked the land his entire life. "Your web," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was strong, almost crushing, a statement of his physicality and his fear. Thank God someone is taking this seriously. We went inside, and he showed me the details. 7 workers, all attacked in the early morning hours while preparing equipment or moving livestock. 3 had been killed outright. 4 had survived, but with injuries so severe that they were hospitalized in Austin. The wounds told the story Hartley couldn't put into words. Deep lacerations, claw marks that were far too large for any natural predator, evidence of something that didn't just kill for food, but killed with deliberate savagery. "The last one was 2 nights ago," Hartley said, pouring us coffee in his kitchen. "A kid named Raphael, only 19 years old. He was working the south pasture, checking on the cattle, when something came out of the cedar break. He managed to climb onto a fence post and signal for help, but by the time my foreman got there, he was bleeding out. The doctors say he'll lose his right arm. 2 more inches up and he'd have bled out before they got him to the hospital." I studied the photographs Hartley had taken, images of the scene, of the ground where Raphael had been attacked. The pattern was different from the West Virginia kill. This creature was feeding on the livestock too, not just hunting humans. There were carcasses scattered across the pasture, cattle torn open and partially consumed, their remains left as some kind of macabre territorial marker. "I'll need to see the locations where the attacks occurred," I said. "Tonight, if possible." Hartley had provided weapons, a rifle and a shotgun, but I declined, preferring my own equipment. The sun was beginning its descent as we drove out to the south pasture, the sky turning orange and red as the day ended. The landscape was exposed here, rolling grassland with scattered cedar and oak, long sightlines in all directions. Except for the cedar breaks, dense thickets of scrubby cedar that could hide something large if it stayed still and patient. "The creature is using the breaks as cover," I said, studying the terrain. "It hunts in the early morning because the light is still weak and the darkness is still present. It's intelligent enough to understand that visibility affects its ability to hunt without being seen." "So what do we do?" Hartley asked. "We hunt it on its schedule, which means we're in position before dawn and we wait for it to make its move." That night, I positioned myself in the south pasture with a clear line of sight to the cedar breaks where the previous attacks had originated. Hartley wanted to help, but I insisted he stay back at the house with his shotgun loaded and doors locked. A frightened rancher would only complicate matters during the actual confrontation. The moon was 3 days past full, still bright enough to illuminate the landscape with pale gray light. The temperature dropped as night progressed, and by midnight I was shivering beneath my heavy jacket. The sounds of the Texas night surrounded me: crickets, distant coyotes, the wind moving through the grass. I'd learned to filter out these normal sounds, to listen for the abnormal, the things that indicated the presence of something predatory. At 4:47 a.m. I heard it, the cedar branches breaking as something large pushed through them. The creature emerged slowly, testing the wind, its massive frame becoming visible against the gray-lit landscape. It was larger than the West Virginia specimen, broader across the shoulders, moving with a confidence that suggested it had hunted in this location many times before. The creature walked to the center of the pasture where several cattle were sleeping. It moved between them, sniffing, selecting its prey with deliberate intention. When it finally chose a target, a young bull that weighed around 800 pounds, it attacked with brutal efficiency, pinning the animal and tearing into its throat with teeth and claws. The bull's death scream echoed across the pasture, a sound that was cut short as the creature continued its feeding. Other cattle began to panic, running in different directions, their eyes wide with primal fear. But the creature ignored them, focused only on the body beneath its jaws. I waited. I waited for the creature to feed fully, to lower its guard as the hunger was satisfied. I waited for the moment when predator became complacent. After 10 minutes, when the creature paused to breathe and look around, I fired. The silver bullet caught the creature in the upper back, just below the shoulder. It shrieked, a sound that was half wolf, half human, a wail of pain and rage that sent the remaining cattle scattering across the pasture in a panicked stampede. The creature turned toward me, its eyes glowing red in the darkness, its jaws dripping blood. It was wounded but far from defeated, and as it began to advance, I understood that this hunt was about to become far more complicated than I'd anticipated. "You are not welcome here," the creature growled, its voice guttural and thick, but carrying unmistakable human intelligence. "This territory is claimed." It was speaking. The creature was speaking in English, forming words with a mouth not designed for human language. That intelligence, that ability to communicate, meant this was not a simple beast driven by instinct. This was something far more dangerous. I fired again, aiming for the center mass, watching the silver bullet strike the creature's ribs. It didn't slow down, It accelerated, crossing the distance between us in seconds, moving faster than anything that size should be capable of moving. I dove to the side, rolling across the grass as the creature passed where I'd been standing. It turned, trying to follow my movement, but the silver bullets in its body were beginning to affect it. Its movements becoming less precise, its breathing more labored. The creature charged again. This time I didn't try to outrun it. I planted my feet and fired directly at its face as it came toward me, the rifle bucking against my shoulder as the silver bullet struck the creature just below its left eye. The impact threw its head back, and it stumbled, falling forward and rolling across the grass. I had seconds, maybe less. I charged toward the fallen creature, dropped the rifle, and pulled the silver knife from its sheath at my side. The creature was already recovering, pushing itself up on its front legs, preparing for another attack. I drove the knife down with all my force, aiming for the heart, knowing that this was the only target that would stop it permanently. The creature rose to meet me, its jaws snapping, trying to tear my arm off before I could complete the strike. I twisted, felt the knife blade deflect off a rib, felt teeth close on my bicep and tear through skin and muscle. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I screamed, used the pain to fuel my desperation, twisted the knife, and drove it deeper into the creature's body. This time, I felt it strike something vital. The creature convulsed, releasing my arm, its body going rigid as the silver poisoned its bloodstream from the inside out. I fell backward, my arm bleeding heavily, the muscles screaming with damage. The creature fell onto its side, its breathing becoming ragged and irregular. In the pale light of the early dawn, I watched as its form began to shift. The fur receded, the snout shortened. The skeletal structure beneath the skin realigned itself into something approximating human form. When the transformation was complete, a man lay in the grass. He looked to be in his early 40s, with scars covering his entire body. Evidence of a life spent transforming, fighting, and apparently hunting. His eyes, still glowing faintly red, locked onto mine. "You will not win," he said, his voice still carrying that guttural quality even in human form. "We are many. You are one. We breed. We spread. We are inevitable." Then his eyes closed and his breathing stopped. I was bleeding badly. The creature's teeth had torn deep into my arm, causing damage that went beyond what I could treat myself in the field. I called Hartley, told him to bring his truck to the south pasture and to bring medical supplies. The infection from a werewolf bite was something I'd read about in Kessler's journals, a toxin that the creatures could inject through their saliva, a poison that would either kill a human or transform them into a creature like themselves. Hartley arrived within 20 minutes. He saw the blood, saw the wound, and his face went pale. He didn't ask questions. He drove me to a veterinary clinic he knew in nearby Austin, a place where the owner was sympathetic to unusual injuries and willing to treat without asking details or filing reports. The vet, a woman named Susan Reeves who looked to be in her mid-50s, cleaned the wound with a precision that suggested this wasn't her first unusual injury. As she worked, I felt the infection beginning to spread through my system, a burning sensation that started in my hand and traveled up my arm toward my heart. "What did this?" Susan asked, her voice professional but concerned. "Something that shouldn't exist," I replied. "Is there medication you can give me? Antibiotics strong enough to fight it?" Susan hesitated, then retrieved a bottle of pills and several syringes. "This is experimental, not approved for human use. But if you've been bitten by something with a venom or toxin in its saliva, this might work. You'll need to take multiple doses over the next week. High fever is likely. You'll feel like you're dying. Most people would go to a hospital." "I can't." She didn't ask why. She simply prepared the medication and injected it directly into my bloodstream. Within minutes, the burning sensation in my arm began to recede. The infection was still there. I could feel it, like a cold fire spreading through my tissues. But the medication was slowing its progress, giving my immune system time to adapt and fight back. I spent 4 days in a motel room in Austin, burning with fever, my arm swollen to nearly twice its normal size, my body racked with pain and chills. I thought I was going to die. I thought the infection was going to transform me, that I would wake up in the middle of a full moon and discover that I had become the very thing I hunted. But on the 5th day, the fever broke. The swelling in my arm began to recede. The infection was gone, defeated by the combination of Susan's medication and my own body's immune response. I returned to Hartley's ranch 3 days later. He'd been searching the south pasture, and his men had found the creature's body where I'd left it, partially hidden in a cedar brake. The transformation into human form had made identification possible. The creature's name was David Rollins. He'd been a ranch hand on Hartley's property for 8 months. He'd been hired through a labor service with falsified references. He had been hunting and killing his co-workers systematically, using the cover of his employment to gain access to his prey. Why? Hartley asked me. Why would he do this? Because he was hungry, I said. And because we had no idea he was there. For all his intelligence, for all his ability to blend into human society, he was still driven by the fundamental predatory instinct that defines what he was. He couldn't resist feeding. I took payment from Hartley, $50,000, which I added to the growing fund I was building for my equipment and supplies. Before I left, I warned him. There might be others, I said. The one I killed might have had a pack, might have had family or associates who were also carriers. Watch your employees carefully. Look for patterns. And if you see anything unusual, contact me immediately. As I drove south toward New Orleans, following another lead about a creature that was hunting pregnant women in the bayou, I thought about the creature's final words. We are many, you are one. We breed, we spread, we are inevitable. It was a promise and a threat, whispered by a dying thing that knew it had been defeated, but believed absolutely in the ultimate victory of its kind. I wondered if it was right. I wondered if I was truly making a difference, or if I was simply delaying the inevitable end that this war would eventually bring. But I kept driving, because my mother was dead, and Elizabeth was dead, and somewhere in New Orleans, something was hunting innocence in the darkness. The hunt continued. New Orleans was different from anywhere I'd been before. The city had a weight to it, a heaviness that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat and humidity. It felt like the place itself was haunted, like centuries of violence and sorrow had seeped into the very soil and the buildings that stood upon it. The Crescent City was beautiful and corrupt in equal measure, a place where the line between the living world and something darker seemed thinner than it did elsewhere. I arrived in early June, following a trail of missing persons reports and unexplained deaths. Over the past 3 weeks, 5 pregnant women had disappeared. Their bodies were found days later in the swamps surrounding the city, drained of blood, their bodies mutilated in patterns that suggested ritualistic killing rather than simple predation. 2 unbaptized infants had also gone missing from a hospital maternity ward, taken directly from their cribs, their bodies never recovered. The local police were baffled. The disappearances didn't follow a predictable geographic pattern. The times of abduction varied. The only constant was the targeting of pregnant women and newborns, and the ritualistic nature of the killings. I set up a temporary base in a small hotel in the Marigny neighborhood, paying cash for a month in advance. From there, I began my investigation, studying the victim locations, interviewing family members of the deceased, trying to identify a pattern that would lead me to the creature responsible. One family member, a woman named Helena Thibodeau, whose daughter had been among the victims, provided me with a crucial piece of information. She kept calling, Helena said, sitting across from me in my hotel room. Before she disappeared, Marie said she kept hearing this voice in her dreams. A woman's voice, beautiful and sweet, calling her name. The voice would invite her to come to the bayou, to meet her there. Marie said she would wake up crying, feeling this overwhelming urge to go, to find the source of that voice. Did Marie go to the bayou? I asked. She tried to resist. But 3 nights before she disappeared, she woke up and said the voice was too strong, that she had to go. My husband and I locked the bedroom door. We sat with her all night. But in the morning, the door was still locked, and Marie was gone. The window was closed and locked from the inside. I don't know how she got out, but she was gone, and 4 days later they found her body in the water near Bourbon Swamp. The pattern was becoming clear. The creature was using some form of supernatural lure, targeting vulnerable women, calling them away from safety. It was predatory in a sophisticated way, using deception and psychological manipulation rather than simple violence. I interviewed other families, and the stories were consistent. The victims reported hearing voices, experiencing dreams and compulsions they couldn't explain. They were drawn to specific locations in the bayou as if pulled by invisible threads, and once they were in the swamp, they disappeared. I spent the next week surveying the areas where the bodies had been found. The bayou was a maze of water channels, dense vegetation, and half-submerged islands. It was perfect habitat for something that wanted to remain hidden, somewhere a creature could hunt undisturbed and dispose of evidence in the murky water and quicksand. But I needed to understand how the creature was luring its victims. That required me to get inside its mind, to understand its methodology. I spent a night at a local library, researching folklore and mythology related to New Orleans and the surrounding bayou. I found references to loup-garou, the Cajun werewolf, but also to something else. A creature that could manipulate perception, that could create illusions, that could call to people from a distance. I also found references to a specific ritual practiced by practitioners of voodoo and hoodoo traditions. A ritual that involved using the voice of a beautiful woman to lure victims, that involved the consumption of blood during pregnancy, that supposedly granted the user power and extended life. By the second week of my investigation, I had narrowed down the search area to a specific section of the bayou near the Pontchartrain Swamp. The bodies had all been found within a 2-mile radius of this area. And when I surveyed the terrain, I found what I was looking for. A structure that didn't belong, barely visible through the dense vegetation. It was an old plantation house, built on elevated ground that kept it above the waterline. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, its paint faded and peeling. But there were signs of recent activity. Cleared vegetation around the structure, fresh water marks on the exterior walls. And most tellingly, human remains scattered in a circle around the perimeter. Small bones, perhaps from animals, arranged in a pattern that suggested deliberate placement. This was where it lived. I set up surveillance, positioning myself in the dense swamp vegetation about 200 yards from the house. I had a rifle with a thermal imaging scope, allowing me to see through the darkness even when the house was unlit. I had ammunition loaded with silver, a knife with a silver blade, and my phone on silent, ready to call for backup if needed. Night fell. The bayou at night was a different world, the sounds of insects and frogs creating a constant pulsing backdrop of noise. The water moved with the presence of alligators and other things better left unnamed. I held my position, controlling my breathing, waiting. At midnight, I heard it. A voice, female, young, impossibly beautiful. It carried across the water, seeming to come from multiple directions at once, creating an acoustic effect that was disorienting. The voice was singing, wordlessly, a melody that was hypnotic and deeply unsettling. I felt the pull of it immediately. My rational mind understood it was a lure, but something deeper in my nervous system wanted to respond, wanted to move toward that voice to find the source, and I gripped the rifle tighter and didn't move. The singing continued for perhaps 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the front door of the plantation house opened. The creature that emerged was humanoid, but grotesquely beautiful. She appeared to be a woman in her mid-30s, with long black hair and pale skin. She wore a dress that seemed to shimmer in the darkness, almost transparent. But as she moved down the steps of the house, I could see that there was something wrong with her proportions. Her limbs were too long, her movements were too fluid, too serpentine, and her eyes, when the moonlight caught them, glowed with a sickly yellow light. She walked to the edge of the water and stood there, perfectly still, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond the range of human hearing. She remained motionless for 10 minutes, and then she began to change. The transformation was different from what I'd seen before. Instead of a violent shift, it was gradual, almost balletic. Her body elongated. Her skin began to darken, patches of fur emerging from beneath the surface. Her face reshaped itself, the human features becoming more animalistic. By the time the transformation was complete, what stood at the water's edge was something that defied easy categorization. Part woman, part wolf, part something else entirely. The creature dove into the water and began to swim, moving with a grace that no human could match. I tracked her through the scope, watching as she glided through the water, moving toward the deeper bayou. I wanted to shoot, to take the shot from distance and end this, but something held me back. The creature was too fast, too aware. If I fired and missed, it would flee. And I wouldn't get another chance before it disappeared into the labyrinth of the swamp. I had to follow. I swam after it, staying underwater as much as possible, using the vegetation and the murky water for cover. The creature moved deeper into the bayou, away from human habitation, into regions that were truly wild and untamed. After perhaps a mile, it surfaced on the shore of an island, transforming back into its human form as it climbed onto dry ground. I watched from the water, my knife in one hand, my gun slung across my back. The creature was standing on the island, the water streaming off its skin, when it suddenly turned toward my location and smiled. "I've been hunting for you, Hunter," it called out, its voice now carrying that musical quality combined with something darker underneath. "I've heard the whispers about the man who kills our kind, the one who kills without mercy, without hesitation. I wanted to see you for myself." It had known I was there. It had allowed me to follow it. This was a trap. I pulled myself out of the water and faced the creature directly. In the moonlight, it was terrifying and hypnotic in equal measure. Its human form was genuinely beautiful, but there was something fundamentally predatory in its gaze, something that told me this was a creature far more intelligent than the others I'd hunted. "My name is Isabella," it said. "I've been in New Orleans for 73 years, though I've only been hunting pregnant women for the past 5. It's a specific hunger, you understand. The unborn carry a potential that is intoxicating, and the newborns—" It paused, licking its lips. "The newborns have not yet had the chance to develop the spiritual walls that older humans possess. They are clean, pure, delicious." "I'm going to kill you," I said. Isabella laughed. "No, you won't. You're good at killing my kind when we're single-minded and driven by base hunger. But I'm not like the others. I'm older than this continent. I've seen civilizations rise and fall. I've accumulated centuries of knowledge about how to survive. And right now, I have something you want." "What?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. One of the newborns I took, a baby girl born just 3 days ago. Her mother is dead, but the child survived. I've been keeping her alive. She's in a house on Bourbon Street, hidden in a cellar beneath a restaurant, protected by mechanisms you couldn't possibly overcome. Isabella tilted her head. You could kill me right now. But then the baby dies. She'll starve in that cellar and no one will ever know where to find her. Her mother is gone. Her father is gone. She'll simply disappear, another victim of the city's violence. I felt the trap closing around me. This was different from every hunt I'd done before. The creature wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to control me, to force me into an impossible choice. What do you want? I asked. Leave the city, Isabella said. Leave and never return. Don't hunt me. Don't hunt my kind here. In exchange, I'll leave the child in a place where she'll be found, safe and alive. And if I refuse, then I'll transform and I'll try to kill you. It will be close. I might succeed. But even if you kill me, the child will still die in that cellar. So I offer you a choice, Hunter. Your principles or the child's life. Which one matters more? I looked at the creature, at its beautiful, predatory face, at the calculation in its yellow eyes. Every instinct I possessed told me to shoot, to take the silver bullet and drive it through that beautiful form and end the threat. But I thought about the baby girl, alone in darkness, dependent on a creature's whim for survival. I lowered the gun. Show me where the child is, I said. Isabella's smile widened. I knew you would choose correctly. Come. We have a short walk? I should have shot her then. I should have taken the risk that the child was already dead, that this was a lie designed to keep me compliant. But I didn't. I followed the creature back through the bayou, back toward the city, to a location that I would later verify was exactly as she had described. The baby girl was in a cellar, in a climate-controlled chamber that Isabella had apparently prepared with considerable care. She was alive, healthy, sleeping in a portable bassinet. And beside the bassinet was a note with the address of the St. Louis Cathedral, the location where I was to leave the child so that someone would find her and reunite her with whatever family remained. I carried the baby out of that cellar and to the church. I left her on the steps at 4 a.m, knowing that the place was maintained by priests who would arrive within hours. And I returned to my hotel, where I packed my belongings and drove out of New Orleans before dawn. I had failed. I had let the creature escape. I had allowed my humanity to overrule my purpose, and the cost was that a predator that was 73 years old and cunning and intelligent remained alive and hunting in the city. But the baby girl survived. And her survival was the only victory I could claim from that encounter. As I drove north out of Louisiana, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained only a single image, a picture of Isabella, beautiful and smiling, with a message below it. Thank you, Hunter. We are more alike than you know. Someday, you will understand that. I deleted the message and tried to forget the sound of that creature's voice calling across the bayou water. But I never could. That voice stayed with me, a reminder that not every hunt ended in death, and not every victory was a kill. Sometimes survival, for the hunter and the hunted alike, was enough. The Colorado Rockies were a different kind of beautiful than the swamps of Louisiana. They were hard and unforgiving, mountains that had stood for millions of years and would stand for millions more, indifferent to the small human concerns that played out in the valleys below. I arrived in Boulder in late July, the middle of summer, when the elevation made the temperature comfortable despite the intensity of the sun. The mining operation that had contacted me was an underground operation, pulling silver and gold from the earth in a network of tunnels that descended nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. The foreman of the operation, a man named Richard Calloway, had been running the mine for 23 years. He'd never encountered anything like what was happening in the deep shafts. "We've lost 7 men in the past 5 weeks, Richard said, meeting me at the mine entrance. He was a stocky man in his late 50s, with the kind of permanent tan that comes from outdoor work over decades. "All of them in the lowest level, the primary extraction shaft. We've tried everything: increased security, armed guards, portable lighting throughout the tunnels. Nothing stops it." "What does it look like?" I asked. No one who's seen it has provided a clear description. The men say it's large, moves on 4 legs, has some kind of scaled or armored skin. The kills are brutal. One man was found missing his entire left side. Chest, arm, ribs, everything opened up like something had been carving inside him. Another man's body showed puncture wounds that suggest teeth from something with a jaw span of at least 18 inches. We descended into the mine. The elevator dropped us down past the first and second levels, past the side tunnels where the majority of the extraction work occurred, all the way to the deepest level where the creature was hunting. The air temperature dropped significantly as we descended. At the lowest level, it was barely 50 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the summer heat on the surface. The deep shaft was illuminated by a series of industrial lights that cast harsh shadows and left significant portions of the tunnel in darkness, despite the attempts at comprehensive lighting. The tunnel walls were natural stone, dark and wet from groundwater seepage, and the sound of the elevator machinery echoed off the hard surfaces in a way that was deeply unsettling. "How many men are working this level at any given time?" I asked. "Usually 6, Richard said. "We've tried to reduce that number, but the work still needs to be done. The company isn't willing to delay production just because something we can't identify is killing our workers." "Then they don't understand what they're dealing with," I said. I spent the day mapping the tunnel system, identifying the areas where the previous attacks had occurred, and planning a strategy for the hunt. The creature was using the maze-like tunnel system to its advantage, attacking workers who were isolated or separated from the main group, using the darkness and the natural confusion of the underground environment to disorient its prey. By afternoon, I'd established a perimeter in the deepest portion of the active tunnel, positioning myself behind a large pile of ore that gave me a clear line of sight to the most likely approach routes. I had thermal imaging equipment, which would help me see the creature even in total darkness. I had silver ammunition, which would slow the creature, but might not immediately stop it in the confined space of the tunnels. As night fell on the surface, nothing changed in the mine. It was perpetually dark, perpetually cool, perpetually isolated from the normal rhythms of the world above. The mine didn't care about day or night, about the passage of time, about anything except the steady extraction of resources from the earth. By 2 a.m., I'd been in position for nearly 8 hours. My legs were cramping. My eyes were straining against the thermal imaging scope. And then I heard it. The sound of something moving through the tunnel. Something that wasn't bothering to hide its presence. Through the thermal scope, I saw the shape. It was massive, definitely larger than anything I'd encountered before. The body was elongated and segmented in a way that suggested a reptilian rather than mammalian physiology. The creature had legs, but they were positioned differently than a werewolf's legs, splayed outward, moving in a crawling motion rather than a 4-legged run. The creature was moving directly toward the area where the miners were sleeping in a small encampment about 50 yards from my position. I had seconds to make a decision. I could fire immediately from my position and attempt to wound the creature before it reached the miners, or I could let it advance and attempt a more precise shot when it was fully visible under the lighting. I chose to fire. The rifle kicked against my shoulder as I pulled the trigger. Through the thermal scope, I saw the shot connect somewhere on the creature's upper body. The creature convulsed, its movement pattern changing immediately. It turned away from the miners and toward my position, and I realized too late that I'd made a critical error. The creature knew where the shot had come from. It was charging directly at me. I scrambled backward, abandoning my position, running deeper into the tunnel system away from the miners. The creature pursued, moving with a speed that seemed impossible given its size. I could hear the sound of its body moving through the tunnel, the scrape of its scaled skin against the stone walls, the rumble of its breath echoing through the confined space. I fired again, this time without the benefit of the scope's steadiness, aiming more or less at the sound of the creature's approach. The shot connected, but the creature didn't slow down. I kept running, deeper into the tunnel system, following passages I'd memorized during the day, hoping to find terrain that would work to my advantage. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and I used the moment of relative openness to reload and turn to face my pursuer. The creature emerged from the narrow passage into the larger space, and for the first time, I saw it fully illuminated by the portable lights scattered throughout the chamber. What I saw defied everything I'd learned about the creatures I hunted. This was no werewolf, no simple mammal transformed into something predatory. This was something else entirely. The creature was 15 feet long, covered entirely in scales that glinted silver in the harsh light. Its head was reptilian, with a snout that was packed with teeth arranged in multiple rows. Its eyes glowed with a red light that seemed to come from within rather than reflect from without. And along its spine ran a series of spines or ridges that gave it an almost prehistoric appearance. "You are out of your depth, hunter," the creature said, its voice hissing and guttural, but unmistakably carrying human intelligence. "I am not like the others you have hunted. I am something far older, something that was here before mankind, and will remain here long after mankind has turned to dust." "What are you?" I demanded, keeping the rifle aimed at the creature's head. "I am Worm," the creature said. "I am a keeper of the deep places, a guardian of the earth's secrets. This mind disturbs the balance. It opens wounds in the stone that should remain closed. I am here to close those wounds, and anyone who interferes with that work will die." "You're killing workers. You're murdering people." "People are parasites," Worm said. "You scratch and claw at the earth's surface, taking what does not belong to you. I am an instrument of correction. And now you stand before me, a parasite that hunts its own kind. This is fitting. I will end you here, in the deep places where your weakness is most evident." The creature charged. I fired and the silver bullet struck it in the shoulder, causing a small eruption of blood and scale fragments. The creature didn't stop. I fired again and again, putting 4 more silver bullets into the creature's body as it charged toward me. When it reached me, the force of impact threw me backward into the stone wall of the chamber. I felt ribs crack. I tasted blood. The creature's jaws snapped at my face, and I got my arm up to block, feeling the teeth puncture through muscle and scrape against bone. I couldn't win this fight with conventional weapons. I couldn't match the creature's strength or speed or ferocity. What I could do was survive long enough to find another way. I drove my silver knife upward, targeting the underside of the creature's jaw, trying to access the softer tissue of its throat. The blade connected, and the creature twisted away, giving me enough space to push it back and scramble away. The creature was bleeding now, silver poisoning spreading through its system. But it was still conscious, still dangerous, still determined to kill me. It turned and advanced again, and I made a tactical decision. I ran deeper into the tunnel system, away from the main extraction areas, toward the unmapped sections where recent survey work had indicated the presence of underground water sources. The creature pursued, its movements becoming slower as the silver poisoning affected its motor control. The tunnel opened into a cavern, and I saw what I'd been hoping to find: a massive underground lake, the water black and still, extending far beyond the reach of the portable lights I'd left behind. The creature emerged from the tunnel just as I reached the water's edge. "This is your final resting place," Worm hissed. "You have poisoned your body with silver. You are dying. I will eat what remains." "Silver poisoning," I said, understanding finally. "That's the key. You can resist it better than the werewolves can, but it's still toxic to you. It's slowing you down. You're losing coordination." The creature lunged. I sidestepped, using the creature's own momentum to guide it forward. Wyram crashed past me, trying to stop but unable to regain traction on the smooth stone. The creature tumbled into the underground lake, its massive body hitting the water with a splash that echoed through the cavern. I watched as the creature thrashed in the water, its thrashing becoming progressively weaker as the silver poisoning spread through its system, and the shock of the cold water affected its motor functions. After 3 minutes, the thrashing stopped. The creature's body floated, motionless, sinking slowly into the dark water. Worm was dead. I made my way back through the tunnels, my arm bleeding heavily, my ribs screaming with pain every time I breathed. When I reached the main extraction area, the miners rushed out to meet me, asking questions I couldn't answer, expressing relief that the creature was dead. I didn't tell them the full truth. I told them the creature had been a massive animal that had somehow found its way into the deep tunnels, probably disturbed by the mining operation itself. I told them it was now gone and wouldn't return. I told them their mine was safe. None of it was entirely true, but it was as close to truth as they could handle. I spent 4 days in a hospital in Boulder, dealing with the injuries the creature had inflicted. The puncture wounds were deep and carried risk of infection, but modern medicine was effective against infections caused by animal bites. The cracked ribs would heal on their own. The psychological weight of the encounter was another matter entirely. Worm had been different from every creature I'd hunted before. It had suggested the existence of an ecosystem of supernatural predators that existed beyond the scope of werewolf lore. If there was one worm, there could be others. There could be creatures in the depths of the earth, in the caves and mines and underground spaces that humans rarely ventured into, creatures that had their own societies and hierarchies and territorial concerns. It suggested that my war with the werewolves might be only a small part of a much larger conflict, one that had been raging since before humans existed, one that would continue long after I was dead. As I drove south out of Colorado, leaving the Rockies behind, I received an encrypted email on my secure communication system. It was from Kessler, the priest who'd trained me years earlier. The message was brief. "They're organizing. The creatures are meeting. Something big is coming. Be ready." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I drove toward Arizona, following another lead, another case, another hunt. The war continued, even if I was beginning to understand that I had almost no chance of winning it. But I kept fighting anyway, because stopping wasn't an option anymore. My mother's death, Patricia's death, all the victims whose names I would never know. They demanded that I continue, that I keep hunting, that I keep fighting against the darkness that lived in the spaces between the civilized world. Even if the darkness was infinite, and I was only one man. Memphis, in the fall, was beautiful. The heat broke in late September, and the city seemed to breathe again after months of oppressive summer humidity. I drove into Memphis on a Tuesday afternoon, my truck carrying supplies and equipment that had accumulated over the years of hunting. I hadn't been back to the city since I'd left to become what I was. 10 years had passed. 10 years of hunting, killing, surviving, and now I was being pulled back by something I didn't fully understand. The contact came through an encrypted message from a contact I'd never met, but who had clearly been following my work. The message was simple. "She's back, in Memphis. The one who killed your mother. She's returned to finish what she started. You need to come home and end this." I didn't know if the information was accurate. It could have been a trap. It could have been misinformation designed to draw me into a dangerous situation. But I had to know. If there was even a possibility that the creature who had murdered my mother was back in the city, I had to face it. I went to my old neighborhood first, driving past the house where Elizabeth had lived and died. A new family occupied the home now. A father and mother and 2 children played in the yard, oblivious to the violence that had occurred on that property. It should have felt like time had moved on, like the past was past. Instead, it felt like a wound that had never fully closed, one that was being reopened with every second I spent in that place. I checked into a hotel downtown and spent the evening researching recent deaths in Memphis. There had been a series of unusual incidents over the past month. A woman had been found dead in her apartment with injuries consistent with animal attack, but her doors and windows were all locked from the inside. A man had disappeared from his home at night, his body discovered 2 days later in the forest, with wounds that looked predatory. 3 others had died in ways that could be explained by conventional means, but carried underlying patterns that suggested something supernatural. I contacted Detective James Morton, the same detective who'd worked my mother's case a decade earlier. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Morton had aged significantly. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes were still sharp. "I wondered if you'd come back," he said, sitting across from me. "When I started seeing these cases, I thought about you, about what you told me all those years ago." "You didn't believe me then," I said. "I believed something killed your mother," Morton replied. "I didn't believe your explanation for what that something was, but I've been a detective for 37 years, Daniel. I've seen things that don't fit neatly into the categories that official science provides. These deaths, they're like your mother's. Same pattern, same signature. Whatever killed her is back." Morton provided me with files. I studied the locations where the bodies had been found, the patterns of the kills, the timeline of the deaths. They were spread across the city, occurring with increasing frequency. The latest death had been 3 days ago. If the pattern held, another death would occur within the next 48 hours. I spent the night at the hotel, studying the files, planning my strategy. By dawn, I'd identified a location that seemed like the most likely hunting ground for the creature. It was a wooded area near Shelby Forest, approximately 5 miles from where my mother's body had been found. I positioned myself in that location as darkness fell. I had my rifle, my knife, my ammunition, all the tools of my trade honed over 10 years of hunting. But I also had something else. I had closure waiting at the end of this hunt. I had the possibility of finally avenging my mother's death. The creature emerged from the darkness around midnight. It was in human form when I first saw it, a woman who looked to be in her late 40s, with dark hair and pale skin. She was beautiful in a way that seemed artificial, as if the beauty were a mask over something fundamentally wrong. I stepped out of the shadows with my rifle raised. The creature turned toward me and smiled. "Daniel Mitchell," she said, "so you finally come home. I've been waiting for you. I wanted to see if you'd become worthy of hunting something like me." "You killed my mother," I said. "I did," the creature confirmed. "She was simple prey. Alone, weak, unprepared for what was coming for her. But that was before I knew what you would become. Now you're here, 10 years later, changed and hardened and dangerous. This will be far more interesting than killing a defenseless woman." "Who are you?" I demanded. "I'm Cassandra," the creature said. "I've been alive for 193 years. I've killed thousands of humans. Your mother was nothing special. She was simply there, at the right place, at the right time. Her death meant nothing except as a catalyst for your becoming what you are now. Why come back to Memphis? Why reveal yourself?" "Because the war is changing," Cassandra said. "The creatures you've been hunting, The ones you've killed in increasing numbers. We're organizing. We're preparing for a conflict that will determine the future of this continent. Some of us believe that humans are an obstacle that must be removed. Others believe that humans and creatures can coexist if we're more selective about our feeding. And some of us simply want to test ourselves against worthy opponents. The creature began to transform. The human shape dissolved, replaced by something far more monstrous. The transformation was different from what I'd seen before. It was deliberate, controlled, extending over several minutes as the creature seemed to enjoy the process, seemed to want me to see exactly what it was capable of becoming. What emerged was a creature that seemed to combine the worst aspects of all the creatures I'd ever hunted. It had the four-legged structure of a werewolf, but the scales and serpentine movements of worm, and an intelligence that was evident in every deliberate movement. "This is what I am," Cassandra hissed. "I am ancient and powerful and nearly unkillable. I survived your kind's attempts to destroy me during the witch hunts of the 17th century. I hid in the shadows and waited, feeding on the vulnerable, growing stronger with each passing decade. Your mother was the first of many who would fall to my hunger. I fired." The silver bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, and it shrieked, a sound that was part rage, part pain, part something that transcended human emotion entirely. It charged toward me, moving faster than anything that size should move, and I realized immediately that this was going to be a fight unlike any I'd experienced. The creature reached me before I could fire again. It batted the rifle from my hands as if it weighed nothing, and the weapon fell somewhere in the darkness. I drew my knife as the creature's claws raked across my chest, tearing through skin and muscle, nearly disemboweling me. I drove the knife upward, toward the creature's jaw, the silver blade hopefully carrying enough poison to slow it down. The blade connected, and the creature twisted away, more blood spilling from its wounds. "You're going to die," the creature said, "just like your mother died. And I'll continue existing long after your broken body has rotted in the ground." We fought in the darkness. Two creatures, one human, one something other, locked in combat that was both physical and psychological. I was losing. Cassandra was stronger, faster, more experienced. She'd spent nearly 2 centuries perfecting her ability to kill, and I was just a man with a knife and desperation. Then I heard another gunshot. A silver bullet struck the creature in the ribs, and it spun toward the source of the shot. In the darkness, I saw a figure approaching, a man carrying a rifle, older than me, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been hunting creatures like this for decades. It was Father Kessler. "Hello, Cassandra," Kessler said calmly. "It's been a long time. I've wanted to finish what I started 53 years ago." "Kessler," Cassandra hissed. "You old fool! You think you can kill me? I've already killed 2 of your kind. I'll add you to the collection." The creature turned and charged toward Kessler. More gunshots echoed through the forest. More silver bullets found their marks. But Cassandra was too fast, too powerful. She reached Kessler and threw him backward into a tree with enough force to shatter several of his ribs. Kessler fell but didn't stay down. He dragged himself back to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth, and he smiled. "I've been waiting 53 years for this moment," he said. "I thought I'd killed you once. I should have been more thorough." He pulled a second knife from his belt, a larger blade than mine, made of silver that glowed faintly in the moonlight. He charged at the creature, and the 2 of them met in a collision that sounded like thunder. I used those seconds to retrieve my rifle and begin loading it with fresh ammunition. My hands were shaking. My vision was blurring from blood loss. I was running on instinct and adrenaline and the knowledge that this was the moment everything would be decided. Cassandra and Kessler were locked in combat, both of them fighting with a ferocity that transcended the normal bounds of human or creature capacity. Kessler was older but more skilled. Cassandra was younger and stronger. and had the regenerative abilities that came with her age and power. I took aim and fired. The bullet struck Cassandra in the back, just below the shoulder blade, driven toward the heart. The creature convulsed, and in that moment of weakness, Kessler drove his knife directly into the creature's chest. Cassandra screamed. The sound was so loud, so primal, so utterly alien that I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the very core of my being. The creature fell forward, and Kessler moved back, breathing hard, his body covered in blood and wounds. For a moment there was silence, and then Cassandra began to laugh. Even dying, even with a silver knife through her heart, and silver poisoning spreading through her bloodstream, she was laughing. "You think this is victory?" she gasped. "You think killing me ends anything? I'm one of hundreds. We're everywhere now. In every city, every state, every country on this planet. And we're done hiding. Within 5 years, humans will know what we are. Within a generation, we'll rule. You've won nothing, Daniel Mitchell. You've only delayed the inevitable." Kessler fired once more, directly into the creature's head. The laughter stopped. Cassandra's body went still. I drove west with Kessler following behind in his own vehicle. We didn't speak much during the journey. There wasn't much to say. Cassandra was dead. My mother's killer was finally gone, but her final words kept echoing in my mind. "We are many. We are organizing. Within 5 years, humans will know what we are." Kessler had told me that other hunters had reported similar communications. The creatures were becoming more organized, more systematic in their operations. Something was changing in the ecosystem of supernatural predators. They were moving from individual hunting to something more coordinated, more deliberate. The lead that brought us to Phoenix, Arizona, came from an encrypted communication that arrived on my secure system the day after Cassandra's death. It was from a hunter named Margaret Hayes, someone I'd communicated with only twice before over encrypted channels. She'd discovered something in Phoenix that suggested a major gathering of creatures was being planned. "There's a meeting," her message said. "7 nights from now, on the new moon. Location is an abandoned resort in the Superstition Mountains outside Phoenix. At least 30 creatures are confirmed to be attending, maybe more. If you want to understand what's coming, this is your chance to observe without being observed." Kessler and I arrived in Phoenix on the morning of the meeting. The city was sprawling and hot, built in a desert that seemed hostile to human habitation. The Superstition Mountains loomed to the east, ancient and jagged against the clear sky. We spent the day preparing. We acquired thermal imaging equipment, long-range surveillance gear, and weapons. By evening, we were positioned in the hills overlooking the abandoned resort, watching as vehicles began to arrive in the gathering darkness. The creatures came in human form. They arrived in cars and trucks, dressed in regular clothing, appearing as normal as any group of people gathering for a meeting. But as I watched through the thermal imaging scope, I could see the subtle signs that marked them as something other. The way they moved was slightly wrong, slightly too fluid or too precise. The way they communicated was different. Hand signals, brief glances that conveyed meaning beyond what words could express. By 10 p.m., there were 37 creatures gathered in the main structure of the resort. We could see them through the windows, moving around a large open space, apparently waiting for something or someone. Then another creature arrived. This one was different. It moved with a presence that was almost palpable, a gravity that made the other creatures defer to it immediately. When it entered the main structure, the other creatures formed a semicircle, with this one creature positioned at the apex of that semicircle. Through the thermal scope, I tried to get a clearer view of the creature's features. What I saw made my blood run cold. The creature's face was humanoid, but the features were subtly wrong in ways that made identification difficult. It was ancient. I could sense that somehow, though I couldn't explain how I knew. It was powerful, and it was intelligent in a way that transcended the intelligence I'd encountered in every other creature I'd hunted. The meeting began. The creatures discussed strategy, resource allocation, territorial disputes. The ancient creature at the apex made decisions with absolute authority. No one questioned it. No one challenged it. Whatever hierarchy existed among the creatures, this being was at the very top. And then it spoke to the assembled gathering. Its voice was low and carried clearly despite the distance between us and the resort. "The time of hiding is ending," it said. "For centuries we have lived in the shadows, feeding on humans, maintaining the illusion that we do not exist. This served us well when humans were weak and ignorant. But humans have become dangerous. They have technology. They have organization. They have hunters." Kessler tensed beside me. The creature was talking about us. "The hunter called Daniel Mitchell has killed 17 of us over the past 10 years. Father Michael Kessler has killed 47. There are 23 other hunters operating across this continent. They are a threat, but not an existential threat. What is an existential threat is the trajectory of human knowledge. Within a generation, humans will develop the technology to detect us, to track us, to hunt us systematically. We must act before that time comes." The creature paused, letting its words settle over the assembled creatures. "We have 3 options," it continued. "First, we can attempt to eliminate all human hunters before they become too numerous. This will require resources and will alert humans to our existence prematurely. Second, we can attempt to accelerate our breeding program, creating enough of us that human hunters will be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. This will take decades. Third, we can strike now. We can reveal ourselves to humanity not as monsters to be hunted, but as a superior species that can offer humans a choice: coexistence or subjugation." The creatures in the semicircle exchanged glances. There was clearly division among them about which course of action was preferable. "I am Kale," the ancient creature said. "I have existed for 3,000 years. I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen humanity evolve from primitive hunter-gatherers to a species capable of building cities and machines. But humanity remains fundamentally flawed. You are driven by emotion rather than logic. You are tribal rather than unified. You wage war against each other when you could be dominant if you acted with unity." Kyle moved to the center of the semicircle. "I propose we begin the transition immediately. We will create a network of influence within human government, finance, and media. We will place our kind in positions of power. We will manufacture crises that will make humans accept our leadership as necessary for survival. Within a decade, we will control the major governments of this world. Within 2 decades, humanity will either be our servants or will have been eliminated." The creatures in the semicircle began to make sounds of agreement. It wasn't unanimous, but the majority clearly supported Kyle's vision. "The hunters will be dealt with," Kyle said. "I am aware of their locations and their identities. When the time is right, we will eliminate them. But more importantly, we will eliminate their ability to kill us. We will develop weapons that are resistant to silver. We will create a vaccine that will protect our kind from the toxins that human hunters have used to slow our regeneration. We will adapt faster than humans can respond." Kessler stood up beside me. "We need to leave," he whispered urgently. "Now." But I couldn't move. I was processing what I'd just heard. The creatures weren't just hunting humans randomly. They were organizing. They were planning. They had an ancient leader with resources and intelligence that suggested they were capable of executing a plan of this magnitude. Kessler grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the observation point. We moved quickly through the darkness, trying to put distance between ourselves and the resort. We'd made it perhaps a quarter mile when we heard the first howl. The creatures had detected us. Or perhaps Kyle had been aware of our presence all along and had revealed his plans specifically for us to hear. A message that we were already defeated, that our hunting meant nothing against the scale of what was being planned. We ran. Behind us, I could hear multiple creatures transforming, hear the sounds of pursuit growing closer. We made it to our vehicles and drove away from the Superstition Mountains, driving fast through the Arizona night, expecting at any moment to be caught and killed. But the creatures didn't pursue beyond the mountains. It was as if they were allowing us to escape, allowing us to carry the message back to other hunters, allowing us to understand the futility of resistance. We drove through the night, heading south toward the border, not speaking. When dawn broke, we found a motel and rented a room. Kessler immediately made calls on encrypted lines, reaching out to other hunters across the country, warning them about what we'd learned. I sat on the bed, staring at nothing, processing what I'd witnessed. For 10 years, I'd been hunting creatures I believed were primarily driven by instinct. I'd believed that if I killed enough of them, if I eliminated their individual predators, I could somehow slow their expansion into human society. I had been completely, utterly wrong. The creatures had been planning their emergence into human knowledge for centuries. They had resources, organization, and an ancient intelligence guiding their strategy. What I'd been doing, hunting individual creatures, killing them one at a time, was meaningless. It was like trying to stop an avalanche by throwing snowballs at it. Kessler emerged from the bathroom after his calls. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, diminished by the weight of what we'd learned. "There are protocols," he said quietly. "For situations like this, other hunters, organizations that exist to handle scenarios where the creatures might become a genuine existential threat to human civilization. We need to activate those protocols." "What happens if we do?" I asked. "War," Kessler said simply. "The kind of war that might determine the future of human civilization itself." I looked out the window at Phoenix, sprawled beneath the Arizona sun. Millions of humans going about their lives, completely unaware that their world was about to change. Completely unaware that the future I'd glimpsed in that abandoned resort suggested a reality where they would be subjugated or eliminated by creatures most of them still believed were myths. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt true despair. Not the despair of grief or loss, but the despair of understanding that I was caught in a conflict far larger than myself, and that the outcome was no longer in question. The creatures had won. They'd simply chosen not to end the game yet. We drove to Albuquerque because that was where the next message led us. An encrypted communication, sent through channels that Kessler had established decades earlier, indicated that something was happening in New Mexico. Something different from the creature organization we'd witnessed in Phoenix. Something that suggested a being operating outside the normal hierarchy of werewolves and supernatural predators. The message was vague. A hunter, but not like you. Not working for the creatures, working against them and against everything else. You need to stop what's coming. Albuquerque sprawled beneath a cloudless sky, the desert stretching in all directions toward distant mountains. We arrived on an evening when the temperature was still in the high 70s Fahrenheit, the sun casting long shadows across the mesas. I'd been hunting for 10 years. In that time, I'd learned to recognize danger the way some animals recognize predators, through a combination of instinct and experience that bypassed rational thought. And everything about Albuquerque felt dangerous. Kessler made calls while I researched recent deaths and disappearances in the area. Over the past month, there had been 7 murders. All of them followed a specific pattern. The victims were all men between the ages of 25 and 50. All of them had been found in locations that held personal significance to their attackers, and all of them had died slowly, in ways that suggested systematic torture before death. But the most disturbing detail was the messages. Written in blood at each crime scene were the same words, one for each, one by one, until they all pay. I found an archived newspaper article about a murder case from 15 years earlier. A man named Thomas Vega had been accused of participating in the torture and murder of another man, a rancher named Salvador Romero. Vega and 6 other men had participated in what they thought was a simple beating that got out of hand. The rancher died. The 7 men claimed it was an accident. The case went to trial, but a sympathetic jury and a skilled defense attorney resulted in all 7 men being acquitted due to insufficient evidence. Sally Romero, Salvador's sister, had spoken to the press after the acquittal. Her words were bitter and hopeless. "Justice is a lie," she'd said. "They killed my brother, and they're going to walk free. If there were any justice in this world, any real justice, they would die the way he died. But there isn't. So they'll spend the rest of their lives knowing what they did and never facing real consequences." That interview was from 15 years ago. Now 15 years later, men connected to that murder were dying, one by one, in ways that suggested someone was fulfilling Sally Romero's wish for vengeance. I showed the information to Kessler. His face went pale. "I know this case," he said quietly. "I investigated it years ago. I thought maybe one of the men had become infected, that the creature nature was making him seek revenge. But I never found evidence to confirm it." "What did you find?" I asked. "I found Sally Romero," Kessler said. "I interviewed her, and I sensed something wrong. Not supernatural in the traditional sense, but wrong in a way that suggested she'd encountered the supernatural. I tried to track her down years later, but she disappeared. Gone completely. No death certificate, no records, nothing. We obtained the names and addresses of the remaining living members of the group that had killed Salvador Romero. 3 of the 7 had already died. 4 remained. We tracked down the first survivor, a man named Robert Castellano, now living in a suburb north of Albuquerque. Castellano's house was a modest structure in a quiet neighborhood. When I approached the house at midnight, I found the front door standing open. Inside, the house was dark and silent. I entered cautiously, my knife drawn, aware that this could be a trap or the scene of another killing. I found Castellano in the bedroom. He was still alive, but barely. The man had been subjected to systematic torture. His fingers were broken. His body bore evidence of burning. His face was swollen beyond recognition, but his eyes still held consciousness, still held awareness of the agony he was experiencing. "Help me," Castellano gasped when he heard me enter the room. "Please, it's coming back. It comes every night." "What's coming?" I asked. "A woman, or it looks like a woman, but it's not. It's something that shouldn't exist. She comes and she hurts me. She makes me remember what we did to him. She makes me feel everything he felt." Castellano's voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what we did. But I don't deserve this. Nobody deserves this." I wanted to tell him that he was wrong. I wanted to tell him that some people did deserve suffering. But I'd learned over the years that justification for cruelty, even cruelty inflicted on the guilty, was a dangerous path to walk. Before I could decide what to do, I heard the sound behind me. A shift in the air. A presence manifesting where there had been only emptiness moments before. I spun, knife ready, and saw her. She appeared as a woman, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair and dark eyes, and a face that might have been beautiful if not for the expression of absolute hatred and pain that twisted her features. But there was something fundamentally wrong with her appearance. Her edges seemed to blur. Her shadow fell in directions that didn't match her position relative to the light sources in the room. "You're a hunter," she said. Her voice was melodic, almost musical, but carrying undertones of something ancient and deeply angry. "I am," I confirmed. "Then you know what I am. You know that I'm not like the creatures you hunt. I'm not a werewolf or a vampire or something born from curse or infection. I'm something else. I'm what happens when human rage encounters human corruption, and justice becomes a ghost that walks the earth seeking vengeance." "You're Sally Romero," I said. "I was," she replied. 15 years ago, I was Sally Romero. I was a woman who lost her brother to the cruelty of 7 men who faced no consequences for their actions. I waited for the justice system to work. And when it failed, when I saw those men walk free despite what they'd done, something inside me broke, or perhaps something inside me awakened. The woman moved closer to Castellano. Her fingers, when she raised them, had nails that looked more like claws, dark and sharp and capable of inflicting serious harm. "I died," Sally said. "Not physically, spiritually, emotionally. My brother's death was supposed to be the end of my story, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of something else. I found an old book in a library, a journal written by someone who had experienced similar loss, and in that journal there was a ritual. A way to transcend human limitation and become something capable of pursuing eternal vengeance. "You're cursed," Kessler said, appearing in the doorway behind me. "You cursed yourself with that ritual." "Yes," Sally said, turning to face Kessler. "And I don't regret it. For 15 years I've hunted them. I've made them suffer the way my brother suffered. I've taken everything from them, slowly and deliberately, until each one was so broken by pain that they barely clung to life. And soon, only 2 of them will remain. 2 more nights of vengeance, and then I'll be finished." "And then what?" I asked. "Then you'll move on? Then you'll find other victims, other people you think deserve punishment?" "No," Sally said. "When I finish, I'll end myself. The ritual has a price. Every act of vengeance I commit binds me more tightly to the curse. Soon, I won't be able to take human form. Soon, I'll be something that can barely exist in your world. And when the last one dies, when my vengeance is complete, I'll dissipate. I'll cease to exist. That's the price for this power." I understood then. Sally Romero wasn't a creature that needed to be hunted in the traditional sense. She was a human who had been broken by injustice and had found a way to transcend human limitation in pursuit of that injustice's correction. She was tragic rather than monstrous. She was a victim who had become a predator, but retained enough of her humanity to understand exactly what she was doing and what price she was paying for it. Castellano was whimpering now, understanding that his death was imminent, that the woman standing over him intended to complete the torture she'd started and wouldn't be stopped by any external force. I raised my knife, but I didn't aim at Sally. Instead, I aimed at Castellano. "What are you doing?" Kessler demanded, stepping forward. I drove the knife through Castellano's heart. He died instantly. The curse of the torture ended, his suffering complete. Sally made a sound of rage and pain, and she advanced on me, her form beginning to shift, becoming less human and more something other. Kessler fired. A silver bullet struck Sally in the shoulder. She shrieked, but she didn't fall. She turned toward Kessler and then toward me, and I saw in her eyes a moment of clarity, an understanding of what I'd done and why I'd done it. "Thank you," Sally whispered. And then she was gone, dispersing like smoke into the darkness, leaving behind only the fading echo of her presence and the corpse of Robert Castellano, finally at peace. We left the house and drove away from Albuquerque without reporting what had happened. I understood that sometimes, Justice couldn't be administered through conventional means. Sometimes, vengeance was the only answer available to those who'd been broken by the system's failure. 3 days later, I received confirmation that the remaining 2 men on Sally Romero's list had died, both on the same night, both in ways that suggested rapid, almost merciful execution. And then Sally Romero disappeared entirely, her curse satisfied, her vengeance complete. Her existence ended. Kessler and I didn't discuss what had happened in Albuquerque. We didn't debate whether I'd done the right thing by ending Castellano's life before Sally could torture him further. We simply acknowledged that the lines between hunter and hunted, between justice and vengeance, had become so blurred that they were no longer meaningful distinctions. I drove north out of New Mexico as night fell. The desert extended endlessly in all directions, and I thought about everything I'd witnessed over the past 10 years. I thought about my mother, about Cassandra, about Kyle, and the creatures gathering in Phoenix. I thought about Sally Romero and the curse that had consumed her. And I understood finally that I was caught in something far larger than myself. The creatures weren't just threats to be eliminated. They were part of an ecosystem that had existed long before humans understood what predators and prey truly meant. And my role in that ecosystem wasn't to win. It was simply to survive, to fight, to resist, knowing that victory was probably impossible, but that surrender was absolutely unacceptable. I had become something other than human. I wasn't cursed like Sally, wasn't infected like the werewolves, wasn't ancient like Kyle, but I was transformed nonetheless, hardened by experience and loss, and the understanding that the world contained far more darkness than any sane person should have to acknowledge. Somewhere behind me, more creatures were organizing. Somewhere ahead of me, more victims were waiting to be saved or avenged. And somewhere inside me, the grief I'd felt at my mother's death had transformed into something colder and more focused, a purpose that would drive me forward for the rest of my life, however long that might be. The war continued. The hunters hunted. The creatures planned. And in the spaces between, ordinary humans lived their lives, completely unaware of the conflict that was building in the darkness. My name is Daniel Mitchell. I'm 41 years old, and I have killed 84 creatures in the past 10 years. But counting creatures, measuring death by numbers, no longer seemed relevant. The real war was just beginning, and I understood that my individual hunts meant nothing against the scale of what was coming. But I would hunt anyway, because my mother was dead, and because giving up meant accepting that the darkness would win. And I had learned long ago that surrender was simply another way of dying. Daniel Mitchell's war against the creatures has cost him everything, but his fight is far from over as the creatures prepare to emerge from the shadows completely. The true hunter of the werewolves has become a legend, but legends don't always survive long enough to tell their stories. Like this video if Daniel Mitchell's desperate battle terrified you and kept you on edge until the very end. Comment below and tell us what was more horrifying for you, the creature's organization, or the sacrifice of a single man fighting against the inevitable darkness. Share it with someone who needs to understand that some hunters pay with their very souls to protect humanity from things that should never exist. And if you're brave enough to witness what hunts in the darkness and what truly waits beyond the edge of civilization, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and ring the notification bell. That way, you'll always know when new horrors emerge and when new hunters rise to face them. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey through the greatest werewolf hunter's final stand.